Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today's guest is Audrey Langlois, a history teacher and a lover of all things history. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's great to have you on because, as you know, we share a whole lot in common. Even though this is the first time we've actually met, I feel like I already know you.
Yes, we've been talking a lot online, so it's nice to meet you.
So the way I met you is you've started up a new Facebook site called Northeast Kingdom Roots.
Yes.
Now, first of all, who is Audrey?
I'm originally from Quebec City. I moved to Montreal to go to McGill to get a degree as a history history teacher. Moved to Stansted College, teach history there. I'm also the archivist. And then met my husband, who's from Newport. His family's from here, like generation. And then moved to Newport and just, adopted the place as mine and just got very interested in the history of the place.
Right. And then arose Northeast Kingdom Roots.
Well, at first, as I said, there was one already for the Eastern Township. So because of my job at Stansted College, I had been made aware of that group. I had started posting, and I just loved the fact that you had multiple people sharing their pictures, sharing their stories, their memories. And I started by just posting pictures on Newport VD Rocks just to see if there was any interest, if people would, be into it. And right away, by posting the first one, which was the Vermont Hotel, people started sharing, and oh my God, what is that? Or oh, this is where Domino's is. And so I was like, oh, okay. And then eventually I said, well, maybe it's time to create that group. So
yeah, and I had my business group that did a similar thing, but I hadn't had time to actually start just this. I think you operate on kind of a different platform on Facebook, but so I welcomed you to be doing what you're doing because, in my work, 'cause this is my job, it's a lot of time to be doing everything. So so people even asked me, said, "Well, what do you think? What do you think?" And I said, I love it. I said, because I love people who love history. And I actually respect people who can't stand history. I really do. Is most of us are too busy just trying to, see past today into tomorrow. Nothing to say about worrying about the past. But I looked forward to having you come on the show because I just love to find people who really delve into it.
Yes, and as I told you, I was a little bit afraid. I didn't know how you would react, but I knew about your, your journal and the Facebook group that you had, and I was like, if I'm gonna do that, obviously I need Scott to be on board too. And right away, you joined. You were one of the first person to join, and you've been posting. I was like, okay, he's on board.
I don't.
Oh, good.
There are people who think because they record history that they own it. Mm-hmm. I don't own history. I have probably the largest collection of Prohibition photos in the state of Vermont. And when people might think, well, geez, you've already written 2 books on Prohibition. You probably think you own that turf. No, I don't own that turf. So when people have come to me who are writing a book about Prohibition from a different angle, not only do I provide them with the photos, I provide them the photos for free because I don't own those. I don't own history. So,
and I just I like the sharing aspect, and I believe that. I believe that history should be shared, and not hoarded in someone's basement, right? So it's fine if obviously if you collect, if you have it, if you like to touch it and feel it, but share it, and that's what I love about it.
And going sometimes. I don't think a day goes by that I don't learn something about our region's history. Not just Newport, but our region's history. Like I have the programs where you can go through all the old newspapers. I don't know if you do that or not.
Well, yeah, I have, I'm a member, like I have an account on newspaper.com.
Yes.
So, and then, Google Newspaper has some, and the Quebec archives, they scan a lot of their newspapers, and back in the days in the Sherbrooke Daily Record, they would talk a lot about Newport. So I do find a lot of information in that newspaper as well.
When you were saying about being from Canada and about like McGill University, my brain is geared towards history, so I'm listening, and I said, "Oh, we once had a famous McGill graduate here. He was the youngest person, I believe, to earn his master's or doctorate from McGill, and he went on to be called Dr. Gerald Bull." Are you familiar with Dr. Bull?
Yes, a little bit.
Dr. Bull was the founder and operator of Space Research Corporation, which straddled the border at Jay, Vermont, in Highwater, Quebec. A lot of people think it was North Troy because Jay doesn't have a mail-in address, mailbox, as in postal office, so that it always comes up North Troy, even in documentaries. Well, Dr. Bull was, he ran a compound up there producing weaponry, and to move the story fast forward, he ended up being assassinated by the Mossad in Belgium. So there's a little connection to your old alma mater. But because history isn't always pretty. Do you agree with that?
Oh yes, for sure. There's always, like periods, like even when I'm researching the history of my school, right? You would think, like a State college boarding school like would have a relatively, but we have like some darker periods, and so obviously like any towns will have some certain moments that they might not be that proud, but I believe that we need to know it and learn from it, for sure.
Absolutely. Like I one painful chapter, now you look back, it wasn't painful at the time, but talking about colleges, like most high schools here, to bring it forward to today, is they had blackface minstrel shows and everything, and I'm sure you found that kind of stuff in your archives.
Yes, but even like recently I was reading through newspapers, and I found pictures of a minstrel show in North Troy that was organized for a school, and it was for the entire school, and I was like, whoa, like you look at the pictures and it faces you. It's like, we need, like you need to recognize that it happened and, move forward.
Right.
But,
and put it all into perspective, and hoping that we can, hoping we've come, further from that. One thing that strikes me is, I don't know if you've found these yet, if women had an extramarital affair and was caught, they were actually front page news during the 1920s and 30s and 40s, where they would actually be often sentenced to the women's prison. But did it mean that women were the only ones cheating? No. But I have never found a man brought up on charges of adultery. But so there was. That's how come I tell people talk about the good old days.
Yes.
And I tell people, well, let's put it in perspective.
Yes.
It wasn't always, not everything was good. Like bringing up women on charges for adultery, Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah, I'll post a very old picture of Newport. It's like, oh, back, like people will come in. This is, like the good old days. This is when Newport was a good town. I'm like, well, can you put yourself back in
Okay.
those days?
Boy, you and I are so much on the same page because I know and I'm not afraid to ruffle feathers because there are people here, even within, quote, leadership, who prefer that I just write about pretty things or maybe whitewash the history. Newport has a very proud history. It has a hard work in history, but that doesn't mean we were perfect. Um, when we think about Newport of the days of old, is that booming Main Street. Okay, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
But the city dump was located where Gardner Park is now. It's smoldered.
Mm-hmm.
The railroad yard, which was a rat-infested area because it was a lot of grain falling out of the cars. Newport, those pictures of Main Street you see, those are real, but it doesn't depict the entire city.
But even like I think it's yesterday, I posted a picture of the railway section, and you had like houses right next to it, right? So at the same time of that picture, you had the pretty Main Street with the Fords and looks, it's all pretty, but you also had that other picture that was happening at the same time, just a different place. But I think it's the same with every places and institutions. People like to remember the good stuff, but they don't necessarily like to, like the bad stuff.
But I think we can learn so much. We can learn so much through some of the bad too. It's like up by the so-called ledges leaving Newport during the 1920s into the early 1930s. That hill was all barren of trees, and that's where the Ku Klux Klan burnt their crosses that glowed over the city. And I understand that there are people who just want to go, don't write about that. I write about it. I'm not afraid to write about it. Do I glorify it? No, I don't. But I think we need to know where we've come from.
Yeah, for sure. Like because if not, the younger generation won't know, and it's up, like it's up to people like us and other people who have been, sharing on the Facebook group and elsewhere to make sure that, it's not necessarily forgotten, but people know, like our history.
Yeah, and the one thing I noticed in these old photos, no matter how poor the people of Newport were back in the old days, because we've always been a struggling people. I grew up in Newport. My family's been there for generations. My father lives there. No matter how poor the people were, some of those photos, they show people almost always dressed nicely.
Yes. So, but it was rare to have your picture taken, right? So when you did, you wanted to look, like.
But even on the streetscapes, just an ordinary, or people fishing, they might be wearing a overcoat, nice overcoat.
Yes.
And hats we had more than one hat store in Newport, 'cause that was all the rage.
Yes. Well, different way of looking at life, right? Like when you would go out, you had to look, presentable and your best, and it was a lot about, if you were from a good family, you had to dress the part, and so.
So what are some other things you've been learning about the Northeast Kingdom?
Well, there's so much. So I decided I knew a little bit about the close links between Stansted, Rock Island, and Derby Line. So I knew about, sports competitions because of my work since the college, and the relationship between the borders, even in the 19th century, like how, with the Fenians, is that how you say it? So the Fenians coming in and how things were tense for a while. So I knew about that. Now I'm trying to get into the nitty-gritty and focusing on a particular subject. So right now I'm researching about Richard Hearst. We had the Hearst Hotel and Restaurant on Main Street, and digging into his life. And that leads me to you know, like dig into the Memphremagog Hotel, you know, burning and the flood of 1927. And then when it was sold, it leads me to learn about the Burns Theater because the lot was bought by them. And every day I'm just digging more and more and finding more about the region. But yeah, right now I'm focusing on that.
Right. And then have you learned about the demise of Frank Burns, the Burns Theater?
Well, that's where I'm at now because I first obviously like dig into like the time when Richard Hearst was alive,
Right.
and now it was sold, like I said, to the Burns with the idea, well, the Burns Theater, like the group at the end of World War II, with the idea that they were going to build a second theater that was like going to be like 1,000 people, like
Right.
for what. And I have a feeling it did not get
Right,
built.
Frank actually, his body was never recovered. He was out on a boating trip with friends, and I think partaken in some adult beverages. And I believe his body was lost over on the Canadian side, and your now long departed, well, pretty long departed Jacques Bourvert. I don't know if you knew Jacques.
No.
Jacques was really he was the premier historian of Lake Memphremagog. Jacques was also a scuba diver. They used to refer to him as a Jacques Cousteau
Yeah.
of Lake Memphremagog, and he recorded the surface of the stories from above, but he also recorded stories from below, and he actually went in search of see if he could find any
body
remnants of Frank Burns's body. But
Never found anything.
no, I don't know where his archives ever ended up on your side.
Well, Stansted has its own historical society, so it could be there. But there are a lot of historical society on the other on the other side of the border, which are like institutions, like usually funded by funded by the government. Yeah, almost each town has one, so it could be in any one of them or ended up in the big Quebec one. So we'll have to. It's very easy to search and to find usually something because they have very nice database. So I don't know, but I think it would be easy to find out
And
if it ended up there.
And I was telling you, the two premier historians in Newport,
Yeah.
I know they'd be able to help you. Steenie Pepin and Sandy McKenney. There's probably other than Emily Nelson, who's now gone. Emily Nelson did the two-book series on the history of Newport. I don't know. It's a very. Have you seen those books?
Yes.
They're outstanding. They're more unlike mine that are storytelling. Hers are. They are books more like encyclopedias and just about anything you need to know. So, but Steenie and Sandy are certainly very knowledgeable, very helpful people that would certainly be able to help you. And I think I can speak for them. They would certainly step forward and give you a hand if you had questions.
Yeah, I'll definitely contact them. It's just fascinating, and even like his life was fascinating. Like, yes, obviously I'm learning about the history of the town, but the fact that this guy was born in Quebec, at 9 years old became an orphan, then moved here, ended up in St. Johnsbury, and worked, like what you were talking about. Newport is a history of hardworking people. Well, he's an example, like working the railroads, then moved here, had a lunch cart in front of the train station for like a couple of years, and then was able to open his own restaurant, and then ended up, and moved to an hotel, and like did very well for himself, but that was the same guy that was 9 years old, orphan in Quebec on the farm.
Right.
So,
And you know, those stories between the two countries are repeated over and over. It's
Yeah.
like I just probably got done interviewing. I did a series on Gertrude Essoff, and her story is her her mother and a bunch of her siblings left the Abenaki reservation at Odenak, and they eventually settled here in Newport, and they really didn't own anything. They didn't have anything, but they've all succeeded. And Gertrude, so here she is of Abenaki descent, but then she marries a Lebanese person, and whose family came from Lebanon.
yeah.
And so they then make a long story short, they are, thanks to them, we have the East Side
East Side,
restaurant
yeah.
today. So
There are so many, like I've done a lot of work in genealogy, obviously my husband's genealogy, and even sometimes like my students are from Vermont, and I would dig a little bit, and my friends, and there are so many, like they say, I think hundreds of thousands of French Canadian that left Quebec, for the United States. Obviously, did not all end up in Newport, but all the last names, the French last names, and the fact that, we have a big Catholic population. That's all, it's linked to Quebec. Like a lot of people left Quebec because days were hard, and they couldn't work on their farm anymore, and they came here for better days. And the sad part for me, and I'm very mindful of that, is usually I know by digging through so many history trees that it takes 2 generations for French to disappear. That's the I've digged in so many families, and usually you'll have straight francophones coming to Vermont, and then 2 generations later nobody speaks a word.
absolutely, my grandparents were a mixed marriage before mixed marriages, I believe, were as common. I mean, mixed marriage between a English Protestant grandfather and a French Catholic grandmother.
Those were...
And as the story goes, when my even though they were both Canadians, as the story goes, that my grandfather did not want her to be speaking French, and the kids, the only one, I believe, who ever went on to speak French was the one who moved back home to Quebec, and that was the general story of things. Is the French did eventually? I think you're right, about 2 generations.
From what I've seen, they kept their religion. That's why, you have a lot of Catholic churches, in Vermont, but they didn't want to be ostracized. They wanted to blend in, and the language was the big thing. In some towns, they tried to. There were some French towns, but they didn't last long. But yeah, it was this idea of blending in, and even I have friends, and they want their parents to speak French to their, and there's some kind of like no, it's like, I don't know why, but it's this idea that I don't want to be different.
Right.
I don't want to be.
Now, I'm not sure if you're aware, but a lot of people ask me, well, who was the Ku Klux Klan burning crosses against? Because we have traditionally been a very white region.
But they don't like Catholics.
But right, it was French Catholics for the most part, because there was a real
for centuries.
Right, and the thing is one of my dear, I I think of him as a friend just because I love the guy so much, even though I'm not Catholic. Father Davineau. Father Davineau must be about 90 now.
Yeah.
And if he hadn't have been a priest, I think he would have been a stand-up comedian. And he's been on my show. And he was a Brownington boy, born and raised. And he said that, you know, you often hear about the persecution of the French, which is true. He said there was. But he said sometimes people did, like, he said his parents were very progressive. He was allowed to stay over at his Protestant friends' houses, and he was able to go to church with them in their non-Catholic churches. He said that was pretty much unheard of for most families, that the French did not want Protestants going to church.
And in Quebec, I mean, I teach Quebec history until like I think it's the 1990s. Those were two different worlds,
Right.
you know. The school boards, you had the Catholic school boards and the Protestant school boards. So they were two different worlds. They did not really communicate with one another, or you know. So yes, it was unheard of. The Catholic Church in Quebec was very, very powerful until, you know, the 1960s. So you had to obey. There was no way you would not obey what your priest was telling you. And yes, like religion, going to church on Sunday was like, you know.
And I've heard of little towns like Holland having their separate, you know, even though the Protestant kids went to school with the French kids, but they had things they did separately.
Yep.
Our half hour is up, but so we're gonna turn this into a 2-part show. So
Okay.
so this is the end of part 1, but to the viewers, be prepared for part 2. And well, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.